Joining me today is Chuck Walnick, and Chuck is a member of the Philmont Ranch Committee and also, I would say, the inspiration behind the automobiles here at the Villa Philmonte. Chuck, how did you come up with the idea of restoring these vehicles and gifting them to the ranch?
Well, it started with the 1906 Model N, and then we grew from that into, I think we were doing STEM before the STEM program, because both of the other vehicles you're about to see are electric. We had totally restored them, refurbished them to show condition, and then we took out the transmission and motor and put an electric motor in it and filled them full of batteries, and off we go. They go for about 30 miles at 25 miles an hour. Cars weren't built to go faster than that, but the other two cars you'll see were an inspiration after we did the Model N.
So we're going to start with the others and come back to the end.
Fine.
So let's start with this one right here. What's the story behind this car? How did it get here? How did you come into possession of it? What did it take to restore it?
Well, it took about 6 months to restore it. It was in pretty solid condition. The color is not correct because it's painted the same color as the Model N. I took a liberty to do that. The door only has one door on the passenger side, and then the other side is called a porch grocery catcher. There's a catcher on the other side, a little fence that you put your groceries and ware in it, and then you pull up the porch of your home and that would be dropped off, but there's only a passenger side door to it. It's a 1925 Model T. It's one of my favorites to drive, and it's a Roadster. My son didn't want to leave it here. He wanted to bring it home and put a little V8 in it and turn it into a hot rod, but we thought it'd be a great inspiration to all the participants that come to Philmont that says, oh heck, I can do this, and go home and build an electric car. And that was back in 2010, I think it was, or something through that.
And so you said you converted this over to an electric car, put batteries in it, took out the drivetrain. What was the reason for doing something like that?
Again, to inspire the participants that come to Philmont.
Oh, okay.
Just to, again, the STEM program, before STEM. Yeah.
So was there anything exceptional about the restoration of this particular Model T that was outside of what you might consider normal or ordinary?
Well, it's not normal to me. I build hot rods and customs, and to build a car pristine back to its original condition was a task for me to capture, and we enjoy doing it. My master mechanic, Gordon Williams, really had a part, and he passed on us as soon as we finished the cars. We had plans to build a hot rod with an electric motor, and not to bring it to Philmont, that's a little side story to it, but we were going to load it with batteries. We had a electric motor that would simulate close to 750 horsepower, and it would have been built just for the drag strip, but we never had a chance to do it. But that's okay.
That's a bummer.
Yeah.
Now, the second vehicle we're going to talk about. What is that vehicle and what's special about it, and how did it end up here?
Well, that's another one that we built back in Illinois, and the carriage, or the top of the truck, which is all wooden, was built in Vermont and hauled from Vermont to northern Illinois in the back of a pickup truck. The gentleman's name was Ives, and so he built the cab, brought it to us, and then we assembled a 1915 frame, and again did the total restoration on it, thinking that we could convert it back if they wanted to. Then we pulled the motor and the transmission and filled that one full of batteries and electric motor as well. That one is a little top heavy, and it's a little difficult to stop because of its weight, but it's a lot of fun. It's called the C cab, and it was used back in the day, probably on the Santa Fe Trail here, delivering product, apothecary and such, and pharmaceuticals, and maybe the medicine man, selling his wares. And so I thought that would be a vehicle that would inspire the era of the 1920s.
So if I understand that correctly, that's not necessarily a restoration of an existing vehicle, but more a creation of a vehicle that would have been present in that time frame.
Exactly. Ford never built a truck. He would farm it out or subcontract that out to other companies, or you would just buy a frame and a motor. So that's exactly what we did. We had the chassis, the motor, and firewall, and so on and so forth, and then you would build it to your customization, whether you wanted a truck or a pickup truck or whatever it might be. of that era, 1914 and 1917, 1918. That particular frame, with the length of it and the girth of it, usually had a tow truck on it or a hook on the back for towing. That is fun. And then we took the liberty of stained glass on the back doors and bud vases for flowers and so on and so forth, which was era perfect, if you will. All fun stuff.
Now let's talk about the Model N.
This is my favorite.
Is the special one. What makes this one your favorite, and why is it so special?
Well, I've been in the ranch committee for almost 4 decades, and walking through the garages over the years, right here on my left was this little car, but it was black, and it was put together with Model A parts, Model T parts, only because the story is that a chief scout came through Philmont, through the garage here, and they had 2 buggies, doctor buggies, if you will, for a horse, and this little black car sitting here. And I kept looking at it because I had a Model A when I was 11 years old, and I couldn't figure out what the car was. It had the bow tail on the back, wood. Model A didn't have wood, but it had Model A grill on it. It had other pieces on it. It was morphed. It was just a bunch of parts, to the point of the scout executive saying, either get rid of this or make it look like a car. So they took it to Raton and made it look like a car and brought it back. And then Keith Galloway and Brian Gray asked me one day, Chuck, what do you consider taking this home and getting it running and refurb it? And it took me about a year to research and find out that underneath all of this camouflage parts was indeed the structure of a Model N. And it was one of the very first built. Took it home, and 9 months later we delivered it to San Diego to a national meeting where it made its debut, and it was a big hit. Hauled it all the way from Illinois to San Diego and back again to finish the restoration, and then we brought it back to Philmont, I think in about 2008.
And this particular car actually belonged to Wade and was here at the property when the donations were made.
Exactly. It was the only vehicle left on the property when he donated it to us. And it was back in the polo barns next to a biplane, which I would love to find and play with that, but that is since gone. But it was sitting there rotting away, and then at that time, they brought it here and morphed it, and then we took it and made it into this beautiful little jewel that it is.
Your explanation of it reminds me of that Johnny Cash song, One Piece at a Time.
Exactly.
And put the car together.
Yeah.
So what were besides the research and collecting it, how difficult was it to find all the necessary parts to restore this back to what it really was?
The answer to that is yes. It was a journey. That was where I first met Gordon Williams, my master mechanic, and he said, yeah, I'll take on the project, but you got to find all the parts. Well, that put me to task. Early Ford registration group was phenomenally important to the restoration. We made our own nuts and bolts. We had to do that. We tooled those. Where do you find a transmission for a 1906 Ford? We had to build it, gear by gear, because there were none around. Every part we made 5 of, and we offered those to others that may someday build a Model N. And that was kind of the brotherhood and fellowship that we went through the build. Like I said, it took about 9 months. And the thrill of it is when we first delivered it to Illinois, my grandson at that time, I think it was 8 or 9 years old, disassembled the fenders, and my granddaughter helped when we were sanding the new box in the back, actually the body, and my son was involved, and Judy did all the bookkeeping on it, so our family was really involved in the project, and they still talk about it. When they visit Philmont, said, well, I had my hands on this one, and it was a joy to build.
Very cool. Well, Chuck, I'd like to thank you immensely for taking some time out of your schedule while you're here for the Ranch Committee meeting and help us to understand a little more about the history of these cars.
Well, I have one additional comment.
Sure.
When I was taking the vehicle, when the vehicle was putting on the trailer to come to Illinois, the last comment made by, I think it was Keith Galloway, the general manager, because of my knowledge of hot rods and so on, he said, don't put a Hemi in it. And that was a big joke at the time, coming back with a Hemi in this little car. But indeed, the Dodge brothers, who build the Hemis, are noted for that, actually built the motor and the drivetrain for this vehicle. So it did come back with a Dodge project, and call it a Hemi.
Well, thank you much, Chuck. Appreciate all that information. That's all we have time for this time. Join us again as we continue to learn more about the history of the Boy Scouts of America, Philmont Scout Ranch, through the collection of the National Scouting Museum and Artifact of the Week.